you hear me? Okay, there we go. Gotta get a little closer. My name is Sarah D'Amato, and I am the project director of the Legal Aid of Durham's Eviction Diversion Program. Thank you, council people and Mayor Pro Tem and Madam Mayor for this invitation. Like a good lawyer, I will talk all day long about my case and my cause, and so I will try to just share with you some of the basic information about our program. Our program, as y'all know, is funded by the city, and so consider this perhaps a State of the Union report on our City of Durham Eviction Diversion Program. And so I want to, before I get started, introduce myself. Again, my name is Sarah D'Amato. I've lived in the Triangle all my life. I grew up in Hillsborough, went to UNC for undergrad, went to Central for law school, so lived in Durham. I live in Pittsburgh now. I've lived in Raleigh. So while Durham, I don't live here, I did live here. I do consider myself a native of sorts to the Triangle. So these issues of how housing affects us do mean a lot to me. We have also here Ashley Campbell, who is now the Executive Director of Legal Aid of North Carolina. Peter Gilbert is in attendance. He was the attorney who spearheaded this program when it started, and then Leon Horn is a supervising attorney with us also in our program. So again, thank you for this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about what we do. I am going to talk a little bit about the history of our program, and then I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about what we're doing now with your money and the taxpayers' money for our program. And then I want to talk a little bit about where I hope we go. And I've heard, Madam Mayor, you call for us to go big, and I am inspired by that, so I'm going to put our ask in for more money throughout this program, and I hope that you can see through our results that we are good stewards of the city's money and that we are doing good things for the residents of the city of Durham. And then, of course, if y'all have any questions at the end, I will do my best to answer those. The Durham Eviction Diversion Program, there we go. Did this advance? No, that was backwards. Let's put it the right way. There we go. So the Durham Eviction Diversion Program began as a partnership with the Duke Civil Justice Clinic and Legal Aid of North Carolina, in conjunction also with the Durham County Department of Social Services. And the primary goal of this program when it started was to avoid eviction judgments and to decrease the number of eviction filings. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in terms of what that looks like in practice, but that is the primary goal. Some of the ideas that go along with that are trying to make sure that people, if they stay in their house, ideally we would avoid a filing in the first place. So the program started in 2017. There were only a few attorneys. I hear all kinds of stories about how many cases they all had to handle, sort of like how our parents were like, I had to walk to the school 2 miles in the snow. So when the project launched, there were not a lot of attorneys. There was not a lot of staff on that project, and they still handled a lot of cases. Back in 2017, 2018, eviction filings were a lot higher than they are now, even a lot higher than they were in 2019 or 2020 before the pandemic started. So the eviction diversion program that we have in place is modeled after in Michigan, there were some eviction diversion programs, and so Durham took those ideas and modeled this program after that. And one of the things I don't mention here, but I think it's important to know, is that other municipalities in North Carolina have modeled their programs after what we're doing here in Durham. So Raleigh is doing an eviction diversion program of sorts. Mecklenburg, and then Greensboro are all doing eviction diversion programs that are in some way, shape, or another modeled after what we're doing here in Durham. So a lot of times, part of my job is hearing from other people across the state to say, hey, y'all have got this program, tell me about it. What's it look like? And that's because they see what we're doing, they see the impact that it has, and they want to do it too. So in that sense, Durham has been a real trailblazer in that regard, I believe. I will note that, and I've mentioned here that diversion, at this point, it's really it's sort of a pipe dream. We try to hope that that's what we're going to do. We would like to be able to totally prevent somebody from being filed on and being evicted, but unfortunately, in this environment, that's not happening as much as we would love for it to happen, and that a lot of that is due to factors that are outside of our control, which I will address a little bit later down the road. And so unfortunately, so many people, if they get behind 1 month here in Durham, or if their landlord wants to sell their house, they are going to be filed on. There will be an eviction filing. Whether or not that case eventually gets resolved because the tenant pays the money or because the tenant moves out before the court date, that is left to be seen. But in most of those situations, somebody is going to get a court filing if they are still in possession when their landlord wants them to be gone. So we do our best, we try when we have the opportunity to get cases before there's a filing. We do our best to try to prevent that filing. But once there's a filing after that, our main strategy is to ideally keep them housed or to prevent there being an eviction judgment on their record moving forward. So that's where we were. The initial funding came from $200,000 support from the city of Durham. There was a smaller grant, and there were 4 attorneys, and they committed to handling 420 cases per year. So that's kind of where we were going in 2019. And then let's take us to where we are right now. Right now, that current funding that comes from the city, there was an initial $500,000 for the 3 years of 2020 through 2023. And then due to ARPA funding, we got that additional $1 million for the 2 years, so 2022 and 2023. And so right now, the current staffing, there's myself as the program director, there are 2 supervising attorneys, there are 7 staff attorneys. We hired 4 in the spring of 2020, and then we hired 4 more in the summer of 2022. Those 4 additionals that came on in the summer of 2022 were as a result of the courthouse clinic ARPA funding project that the city graciously funded. We have 5 paralegals. One of those is a Spanish-speaking individual. I'm the only Spanish-speaking attorney on our staff at this point. And then we do have a community resource coordinator. The community resource coordinator's role was essential to the initial program, and what CAS does is to connect our folks with coordinated entry, with the Community Empowerment Fund, with DSS, with DHA. So he is really the liaison in our organization for connecting folks with the resources in our community and also for building those relationships with those partner agencies. So this is where we are right now. And again, the money that funds this courthouse clinic came from the city, from those ARPA funds. And so this is where I go big and I say, I want you to keep giving us that money, please. I think that you can see that our results show that right now, while we're bridging this gap in Durham between the folks who are facing eviction, while they're waiting for those projects that y'all approved to fund, while we're waiting for those to be present, we need something on the ground right now to keep people housed right now while we are waiting for these units to be built and this affordable housing to be available in our community. And so one of the ways that we do that is by providing what we call the courthouse clinic. We started this program, it was in full force at the end of, let's say, July, August of last year. We have an attorney present in the courthouse on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down for where the magistrate courtrooms are, and that attorney is there from 9 in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we also have a paralegal there as well. So in those days, that is the prime time for small claims cases in Durham. Right now, we're averaging about the dockets each week for small claims court, which is where, and I'll go, maybe I should have gone into the process first, but we'll go into that a little bit later. But when somebody's filed on their first stage of the eviction process in court is in small claims court, and that's in front of a magistrate. And so those cases are all heard on the third floor in the courthouse. And right now, when those dockets are posted each week, we've got anywhere between 100 to 200 cases each week of evictions in Durham. So our clinic allows for people to, without having had any other ability to contact us or to go to any other organization, when they show up for court, they can meet with one of our attorneys or one of our staff in order to do intake. At that point, we're able to do on-the-spot intakes for most cases. And so if somebody is eligible for legal aid representation and time permitting based on how the schedules work on those cases, in some cases we are able to provide same-day representation for those individuals. That representation might just look like, hey, can we get a continuance for another week? And then that gives us time to, in a lot of cases, what it does is it gives us time to connect the tenant with resources in the community. Have you contacted DSS? Have you contacted Community Empowerment Fund? Have you, thought about moving out? Those are the different things that we can do even with just a continuance of a week. And so we are able to do that same day representation in some cases. In some cases, we're not able to. Obviously, as an attorney, we have to make sure that we are diligent in sussing out our claims and making sure that we are upholding our professional responsibilities as it relates to representation of our clients. Most of the people who come to the courthouse clinic have a pending case in court. The other people who come to the courthouse often have just received a notice to vacate and they want legal advice. If they're not eligible for our services, we do refer those individuals to the organizations in our community that we believe to do, depending on the situation, either pro bono work or referral sources for them to find a private attorney. In small claims, most tenants are not represented. In small claims, approximately, I think the statistics are about 90 to 95% of tenants do not have an attorney. And where that comes into play is really, really, in some cases it is as subtle as being able to get a continuance for 2 weeks because you're going to be moving out. So if I can just get a continuance for a week and turn in the keys, then I can avoid this judgment. Or my tax refund, this is what we're hearing right now. My tax refund, I'm going to get it on Friday. If I can get one more week, or we can resolve this issue. So an attorney's presence allows for even something as basic as getting just another week of time. The other part about that too is that it allows us to raise defenses, habitability claims, things along those natures, but we need the time to be able to represent those folks and to develop their case. So that courthouse clinic, we have flyers up. They go out with the summonses for the eviction filings in Durham. So when tenants do receive court papers, they receive a flyer that tells them that they can come to our clinic for additional advice. There's an email address that they can send their documents to, and that email goes to all of us on the team. And currently, we have at least one attorney in court each day, in addition to the attorney who's staffing the clinic. So that attorney is the one who's representing all of the cases for that day, and then you usually have two at this point. So we are at the courthouse every day for small claims. One of the other benefits that I've seen in going there is that we serve also sort of as an usher in the hallways there in the courthouse. A lot of times, the traffic court line starts all the way at the end of the third floor, and it lines all the way up third floor, all the way along. And people will see us there, and they're like, where do I go? And they're not our clients, and there's no other sign. So we are often directing people to, there's traffic court. Here, this is your courtroom here for your small claims case. Downstairs is where you're going to file the appeal. So we have a very constant presence with on the third floor at this point. And then also the other thing is that everybody, if you have a small claims case, magistrate for eviction, then if the judgment's entered against you, you get 10 days in order to appeal that case. And it's a whole, what we call a de novo trial, which means you get to start all over again. And that's actually where we get, as lawyers, the opportunity to do the things like send out discovery requests, where we ask the landlord, please show me your lease, please show me all the notices. That's where we get to prepare counterclaims. We get to do that more intensive legal work. The past few months, we are averaging about 80 cases per week in that district court week. That's once a month in Durham. And so we are there in that capacity as well. And then, of course, if somebody's not represented by us, we can refer them down to the clinic, and then they can get assistance at that point. We've also gotten to the point, too, where the clerks, if there is somebody who has a question or needs assistance with filing an appeal, the clerks will refer people back up to the clinic for our assistance. The judges have also often referred folks to the clinic as well, because they know that a person can go there and get information about the eviction process. So I believe that we have a very strong presence, and I think that is helping us create more relationships within the courthouse. Here's the little nuts and bolts about the summary ejectment process, the eviction process. There's a lot of, when somebody says, I got evicted, so if you ask me what that means, I would interpret that as you went to court, there was a judgment against you for eviction, and then you had to move out. But some people refer to being evicted as if they've just received a notice to vacate. They've been told they need to get out. So it's not an incorrect statement at all. It's just how we interpret what it means to be evicted, right? So, but summary ejectment is the court process by which somebody is evicted. These trials in small claims, there's no right to discovery. So, it's kind of loosey-goosey a lot of times. The trials, if there is a trial, it's only going to last, maybe 5-10 minutes. It's really quick. Corporations do not have to have an attorney. They also have a mechanism in our general statutes that allows them to sort of win even if their client is not there. So that means that we have lots of tenants who show up, and their landlord's not even there to say, hey, I gave this lease, I gave this notice. They don't have a person there to testify, and the attorney can't testify. And in those cases, there's still a judgment that's entered against them. Again, after that judgment is entered, then there's a 10-day period to appeal. The next part is what makes our jobs very difficult, is that after you appeal, in order to stay in your house while you are waiting to have your new trial, you have to pay that monthly rent directly to the court each month. So if you don't, then the sheriff can padlock you, change locks. You may have had the best case. You may have all of the best defenses. And if you can't pay that monthly rent bond to the court, then your landlord can change locks and put you out. That is huge right now in Durham, in North Carolina, especially for individuals who are actively seeking assistance through DSS, for example. They've got promissory notes from DSS that say, hey, we'll pay your arrears, but they're waiting on that check to come through, they're waiting for that assistance, and they can't pay that monthly rent right then, and so then they get locked out. That is not necessarily anything that we can change at this point because that's dictated by statute. But that is one of the things that in the past where we've had rental assistance programs that worked really quickly helped alleviate that effect by providing financial assistance to folks at that first step so that they could at least stay in their house while they continue to defend their case. Again, now if you are in small claims and you lose and you don't appeal in those 10 days, then the landlord can get a writ of possession and lock you out. And so right now, also in Durham, and again, this is statutory as well, they must execute that writ within 5 days. And usually the tenant only gets 2 days notice before the padlocking. So what that means in theory and in practice is, in theory, they get 2 days notice. In practice, what happens is those notices get sent out to the tenants by the mail. And so in some cases, the tenant doesn't know that there was a writ until the sheriff is at the door changing the locks. After the writ is executed, then they've got about a week to go back at least once to go get the rest of your stuff. So as I note here, this whole process from start to end, you could miss your February rent this month, have court next week, and then be locked out by the beginning of March. So when you take that and you combine it with the fact that rents are outrageous, they're increasing, the rental application fees are $50, $75, $100 per person, and you have to have perfect credit and know how to plant daffodils in their garden and all kinds of other interesting requirements. The folks that we represent with legal aid, they are struggling to find housing once they've been evicted, once the locks have been changed. So many folks are living in their car until they find a new place, or they're living with friends and family, or they're trying to get into the shelters. And this is one of the reasons right now why our shelters are full. Just a few kind of what's going on in terms of evictions right now. Non-payment of rent is the majority of the cases. In the cases where there is rental assistance available, some of these programs require a court filing in order for there to be expedited assistance. And so in those cases, with our assistance, and we're able to work with DSS and work with the landlord, in many of those cases, once that assistance comes through, then those folks are able to stay in their homes. So that piece of our work is, I think, really crucial when we have rental assistance funding, is to be able to have another partner that provides that legal assistance so that the two can work together. So when there is rental assistance available, we can preserve the tenancies more often. In another slide, I'll show you some of our outcomes, and it's very clear that when we had the Durham Rent Relief Program, our outcomes and our results at that time, we were preserving tenancies in 70% or so of those cases. Now that there's limited rental assistance right now, those numbers have dropped, because if somebody's not able to pay their past due rent and their landlord wants them out, I can't preserve that tenancy unless the landlord agrees to some type of payment plan or agrees to accept that rental assistance. And that goes to the other one where rental assistance is not available. So in some cases, it's not available because DSS is one of our primary partners on this, and they have income requirements. There's also varied requirements that have to do with how long ago you lost your income or whether or not your tenancy is a sustainable one. And that's based on whether or not you have a job sometimes. So in some cases, that rental assistance is not available. And so a tenant is not going to be able to pay off any past due balance in order to stay in their home. Another situation that we see is a lot of landlords at this point are choosing not to accept rental assistance. One of the main reasons we hear is that if a tenant has had maybe a history in the past year or so, likely due to COVID probably, then landlords are concerned, as they say, with their ability to keep paying moving forward. However, what we also know is that every time a tenant is evicted, the base rent of that property goes up. And each eviction causes those rates to keep going up. So in some cases, landlords are seeing that, their market is really heavy at this point for people looking for housing. People are going to pay $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Durham. This tenant is paying $1,500. It's better for me to just cut my losses and try to rent it out to somebody at a higher rate. So in those cases, in most eviction cases, the landlord is not required to accept payment. And so in those cases, most of the time, those will eventually result in move-outs, either because of an agreement or because the legal line has ended and they're at the end of it and then they get padlocked out. So that's the non-payment cases. The other cases that we see some are the holdover cases. These were really big during COVID times because these were under the radar. They were not included specifically in the moratoriums that put a lot of evictions on hold. Holdover is let's say I've got a tenant on buy a house and there's a tenant there and they're on a month-to-month lease. We've had clients who've been living at a place for 10, 15 years and the owner sells the house and then says, you've got 7 days to be out. So in those cases, our defenses are usually fewer because, if the notice is adequate, there's not too much we can do in that situation. And in those cases, rental assistance doesn't matter as much. What matters in those cases to preserve those tenancies is legal assistance, because we are the ones who are going to bring up legal defenses and also try to maybe work with a new owner of a new house. So, and then breach of lease, these are not as common in private housing. These are more common in subsidized housing, but this is like your failure to report an income or failure to, unauthorized occupants. We are seeing a rise in this unauthorized occupants part, and that is in part because people have a sister who was evicted, and so they want her to, they're offering that they stay with them for a little while, and then if it's subsidized housing, there are limits as to how long a person can stay in a person's house and whether or not you have to report it. And so people are losing their subsidized housing right now because they are offering their homes to family members who were recently evicted. So these are the main things that we're seeing in eviction cases right now. And again, most of the ones that we're going to see are for non-payment of rent. I would say probably about 80% of them are non-payment of rent. Our current outcomes. So I do want to put in a plug. I heard in the previous presentation about the monitoring that is required with this ARPA money. And I will say that Keishma James is the person that we've been working with, and those monitoring meetings have always been very positive and very helpful. And we meet with her monthly, and we provide reports to her monthly as to what we're doing with the city money on that. And so I do appreciate her guidance in helping us with this program and monitoring us. So under the program, we have current goals. Our current goals right now are to preserve the tenancy in at least 50% of the cases, and to avoid eviction judgments in at least 70% of cases, and to open up 840 cases, but that was in part, we're closer to 1,000 is what our goals are at this point. That had to deal with because of the timing of the program and stuff and it being prorated. So I think the little statistics here that I have about our outcomes in December of 2022 and then May of 2022 also show the importance of rental assistance and also the importance of having legal assistance and rental assistance work together in the communities. And so in December, we preserved the tenancy 45% of the time. So that was below our goal when you looked at all of our cases. But if you just look at the cases where we go to court, we are preserving tenancies in 60% of those cases. We're avoiding judgments in 76% of those cases. And that either is because we win, and so a case is dismissed, or we negotiate a move-out agreement and the landlord takes a dismissal in those cases. Now in December, we've had limited rental assistance. Pretty much the only rental assistance that we have available is through DSS. And so again, that is not as robust of a program as previous in the past few years, the ARPA money that's gone through. So if you look in May was when the Durham Rent Relief Program was still very vibrant. People could not apply for it anymore, but they were still receiving prospective rent, and they were also getting arrears paid off. And you'll see in that situation, we were able to preserve the tenancy in 72% of those cases because folks got rental assistance, and then their landlords dismissed the case, or they didn't file at all. So that was really critical at that point. It shows how that rental assistance helped keep people in their houses during the pandemic and then also moving forward. Some of the things I've already mentioned in terms of what we're seeing as challenges at this point. Rental assistance for short-term income loss is very limited. DSS, of course, is understaffed and overworked and highly, there's a high demand. And so even to get a short-term assistance from DSS, it can take weeks. Churches are an option. Community Empowerment Fund now, with some of the money that the city has recently funded them, those are other options for short-term income loss. But a lot of times what we see right now, we're seeing people being evicted for 1 month rent. 1 month rent, and those filings are coming, 2 weeks after that missed payment. So there's not a lot of breathing room in that regard. We're also seeing, as I mentioned before, a high demand for rental units. So there's a lot of people here in Durham who want to rent in Durham. And rents are going up. I think we compared to Durham, I think Raleigh and Durham right now, North Carolina, had the highest rent increase over the past few years. We are also seeing there's not a lot of folks who are accepting these Section 8 vouchers. So in many cases, we're able to preserve the voucher, but then we have quite a few reports of people who have been waiting and looking and looking and looking and looking for a landlord who will accept their voucher. And if they wait too long, if it's been 6 months, DHA, in many cases, can terminate that voucher. So if they're not able to find a new place, then sometimes people are not only losing their housing, but they're also losing their voucher. Again, high cost of finding housing. It's one of those things where I don't know that in general, unless you've been out there looking for a place to rent, that people are aware of how much it costs just to get into a place. And so application fees are non-refundable. A landlord can have you fill out an application. They can have 100 other people on that list before you, and they don't have to tell you that you're not going to get that housing. So you pay $50 for yourself, $50 for your spouse, and you wait. Security deposits. We have also, you have to show that you can afford 3 times the income. We have a recent situation where we realized that a teacher in Durham barely can show that they can afford an average rent in Durham, just barely. Previous eviction filings, again, one of the things that also is not as well known, every single filing against a tenant in North Carolina stays on their residential record. They could have been taken to court 15 times and won every single time. And when their next landlord checks up their residential history report, they will see 15 eviction filings. In North Carolina, there's not a mechanism at this point to erase those from a person's residential history. So every filing in that sense matters. Past due balances, and again, rental arrears, those are also things that somebody might move and they avoid that court judgment, but then now when they try to seek new housing, they check in on the previous landlord. Previous landlord says, no, they owe $10,000, and then the new landlord's like, yeah, no, I'll pass. So those are some of the things that we are seeing. The other part is habitability. We do have, in some situations, people are staying in housing that is subpar, that is, you know, there are a lot of maintenance issues, plumbing issues, mold. We hear a lot of that, and they don't want to or can't move because they can't find another housing opportunity at that point. So the effect of that on a family when you have kids who there's no water, or there's heating bills right now because there's, you know, substandard heat in some units. You know, when a family is paying, you know, $800 to $1,000 a month in electrical bills, well, that's going to cut into the amount that you're able to pay for your rent. So that's the main things that we're seeing right now as to why folks in Durham at this point are having a hard time finding housing and staying housed. Just to talk a little bit briefly about this, y'all are quite aware, again, I've already mentioned DSS quite a few times, but they do send us referrals. We refer to them. That is a relationship. Of course, if we are able to refer people to them for rental assistance, then we are able to usually negotiate with the landlord to see if they'll accept that assistance and hold off on the eviction. Durham Housing Authority, you know, last year when the Durham Rent Relief Program kicked off, we did a day-long clinic there in order to help folks get into the system for that assistance. We also have a good relationship with the general counsel at DHA, so that helps us facilitate, you know, if there's an issue with finding, you know, a person's voucher or you know, anything. So we have a really good relationship in that regard, and we're planning an outreach event in another month or so where we'll do a housing clinic. We're hoping to do it at McDougald again, but we might take it over to Cornwallis Road. So that relationship is also very important for us. Housing for New Hope, again, we regularly work with them. Community Empowerment Fund, we had a meeting last week. I saw that y'all have funded them and given them some money to help for some rental assistance through the ARPA funds. And so now we have also helped establish a referral network with them so that we can send people to them and they can send people to us. And then again, Alliance, a lot of times what we'll do with Alliance is working, especially in order to, if we need to do what we call a reasonable accommodation request, you know, somebody needs extra time to move because they're disabled. Yeah, so sometimes we'll be able to reach out and ask for that assistance. We also do a lot of work with the city, the law schools, Duke, Civil Justice Clinic, and the interns, and then with Central, which on our team, and I know Madam Mayor is a Central alum, as am I, and as is a few of the other attorneys in our office. And I will say that that partnership, of course, is near and dear to me because, you know, if you talk to lawyers in Durham and in the Triangle, you know, it's the Central grads who are in the courtrooms and doing this work. And so I like to think of our program as an incubator of sorts for Central Law students. We work a lot of times in conjunction with the Civil Justice Clinic at Central, because if there's an individual who we're not able to represent, then we can send to them. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, just want to ask, how much longer is your presentation?
Oh, I'm almost done. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here we go, right into the future. Where we are, I mean, I'll go big or go home, right? And the idea of, again, the affordable housing initiatives that y'all mentioned, those initiatives are going to impact evictions, because if somebody has a house that they can go to, then that's going to make it easier for them to avoid eviction and find housing, because they're going to be able to find housing if their landlord wants to sell a house, for example. So that is really important. As I think that as our programs work together, the fact that we can keep people housed until some of these and other initiatives that Durham has going on, until they really start to come to fruition. So it would be my ask again that when you look at our numbers, that you'll see that we've been good stewards of the city's money in this regard. We have done, I believe, a good job keeping folks housed in Durham. When we can, we work and network with the agencies that provide rental assistance, and that's an important consideration. And so it would be my hope that as y'all are considering this next round of ARPA money, that you consider funding us at least at the same level that we have been funded at, in order to continue to bridge that gap in the affordable housing crisis in Durham. So, and then the other things you can talk about later.
Thank you for your detailed presentation. I'm going to ask for questions from my colleagues. I am going to acknowledge Councilmember Williams first.
Thank you. So beyond the idea that this entire system is set up for the actual tenant to fail, and those are my opinions for the record, I want to ask the hard question. What are your suggestions beyond a Band-Aid fix? And that could be anywhere from, us having a lobbyist in Raleigh to what more can we do other than, just an additional week or the temporary support? Because this is not sustainable, and we need something more sustainable, and we need to be addressing this right here.
Absolutely, and that's a good question, and I will put a little asterisk beside it and say that because I'm employed with Legal Aid of North Carolina, we do have certain restrictions and certain comments that we can make. And so I will say that so much of what we're experiencing right now is a result of the statutes that are in place. So many of the programs that we might want to implement, while there is still a statutory framework that requires, it's essentially 5 days notice for an eviction. So somebody can get the papers on their door today for court next week. Their continuances don't happen very often, so we're bound by what's in the general statutes as to how much time these cases take. As I mentioned before, in terms of the writs of possession, the statute says that the sheriff shall serve it within 5 days. So there's little that we can do on the ground to change that. So that is, I think, one huge thing. The other part about it, which is one of those things that is not very concrete, I wish I could say concrete, but when we understand fully that this could happen to any of us at any time, I think it changes that perspective. And so we have to get to that point where we realize and understand that missing 1 month's rent could put you at risk. And that if you don't have those community resources and family resources and generational resources, if you don't have those available right now, you could be out on the street.
So last comment for me, and I do know about that very well. Just to sum it all up, rents are rising. Mm-hmm. Homeownership is getting tougher. You have to have 2 to 3 times the amount of the rent as a security deposit. Am I accurate so far? Mm-hmm. And also you have to go through a clearance check. All right. So we're in trouble.
Well, one of the other things that we've seen too, in that same vein, is that recently, well, in the past year or so, a lot of our Durham residents who were facing eviction, because the rents were going up, they decided, hey, I'll go out to Vance County. I'll go to Granville County. I'll find housing there. Our office in Durham, we also go to Vance, Granville, Person, Caswell, Franklin, Warren, and I always miss
Gotcha.
another one. And now the clients who we're representing out there, they can't find housing either. And so Durham's lack of affordable housing is expanding into the areas around us as well.
Yeah, and I won't be ignorant to this, these are part of the growing pains of a growing city, but I do think that in addition to facing this reality, that we need to put some energy into how we can create a community that is more supportive and through a sustainable lens. And I'd like to maybe speak with you guys at a later time about what that may look like in your line of work.
Absolutely. I think other cities recently have done, for example, like Greensboro at this point has converted a parking lot into a safe parking area for folks who are living in their cars, and that lot is monitored by law enforcement, and there's like a portage on. Other cities have offered lockers that have allowed people to store their belongings in them. So there's some things that can be done acutely, but those are the Band-Aids, right? And so the idea is that we don't need to have people living in their cars.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I look forward to continuing.
Absolutely.
Member Williams, I'm going to acknowledge Council Member Javier, then Freeman, then the mayor.
Thank you. Good to see you, Sarah. I spent a fair amount of time last winter in eviction court, and I did it so that I could see what the process was and to have a better understanding. And I really want to thank you and your team and the folks at Central. When folks can't, so a lot of our undocumented folks can't be served by legal aid. And if you look at a lot of the folks who are getting evicted who were in subpar housing to begin with, but at least they had a roof over their head, it is our Latino neighbors. Many folks can't access the same, maybe not, it's not good enough, but they can't even access it. They can't access the supports that are out there. And so I know that Central often represents those residents. They've been a lifeline for that community, and so I have a lot of deep gratitude for them. I definitely think we have to figure out some form of rent assistance. I know that there's folks working on a proposal that, quite frankly, is way more than we can afford. But when I think about housing, I think we're going to have to do everything. I think we have to look at land use. I think we have to look at building more units. We have to have rent assistance. We have to have eviction diversion. And we have to have every piece. I've heard folks say we need a day shelter, right? So that folks can go and shower and have a P.O. box, because many folks who are unsheltered, if you don't have an address, you can't even apply for a job. I am in the odd situation of being both a tenant and a landlord. I rent, and I rent my house out. And there are some things that folks can do. I did not ask for a credit report. I asked for 1 month's deposit. I understand I'm taking a risk on it, but it's what we need our neighbors to do. And folks who are smaller, these are the small things that one can do that do actually help folks out. You don't need to have 3 months of rent. It's a hard thing to do when you're thinking about, I don't know anyone who has $4,000 lying around, right? Or very few folks who have $4,000 lying around. So I'm just putting it out there because I think there are small things that are beyond government, right? That folks can choose to do. And it's a risk, I understand that. I live it every month. But it's still something we decided to do because we had a house. We charge less than we need to for market rate housing, and it's something else we could choose to do. We're not using our property to completely be greedy and make a profit. We're doing it to hold on to an asset when we're ready to be back in it. And I hope that other folks in Durham also have that attitude. I understand it's counter to the system we are in, which actually, is a system of greed and exploitation. That is a conversation for another day. But I just want to say thank you, and I hope that we continue to fund you all at the level that I've seen. It has been a tremendous support for folks in Durham. It is absolutely necessary, and it's way cheaper to help keep folks in their current housing than to build new housing, even though we also need to do that. But it is cheaper, and that's one of the reasons we did the eviction diversion, is because we saw an opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to acknowledge Councilmember Freeman, then our mayor, and then Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero, for covering a lot of what I would have said. And I did have a few questions in there, and I did want to say to Councilmember Williams, we should probably catch up, because I feel like the Tenants' Bill of Rights is the best way to advocate forward, because if we don't get rights in place that actually allow a tenant to stand in the courtroom and say, these are my rights, it's, the system is set up way lopsided, and that's the best thing we can do. I did want to note or ask, are you collecting copies of all of these lease agreements? And are they housed someplace that students could do research on them?
We have a lease bank, but most of that information is going to be specific to the individual client. And so,
And maybe it's a conversation to have
Yeah.
with a research institution, so that, no personal information, but to at least
Absolutely.
have the language that's being used and the transition, as Councilmember Caballero was mentioning, as folks move to the application fee and to these are all things we could be working to combat if we know more about what's in that lease. And then I didn't know if you were collecting demo data. I didn't see any in your report or your presentation, and so just want to make sure you do state,
Yeah.
who you are serving, because I feel like that's often missed.
Absolutely. The demographics are part of our monthly report that we send to the city. And so I did, for 2022, in terms of our demographics for the year of the cases that we opened, and I think it was a total of about 850 cases or so. Of those, 63 identified as white, 626 identified as Black or African American, and 6 as Native American, and some other race as 61. So an overwhelming, close to, 70% of the individuals that we represent are identifying as Black or African American.
626. That's,
Yes, ma'am.
and I just want to also know, are you collecting the demographic data maybe on landlords, whether it's a large corporation or a single, property owner or multiple property owner? I think that this will all be really good to kind of tie together what we've been saying, what we know kind of tangentially from a lot of stories, in a way that actually gets us to the point where we can make the case that this is a problem for some in our legislature.
Right. At this point right now, we could probably break that down for you. It's not something that we have been reporting on so far. I do know that other organizations, especially DataWorks, based out of Durham, I do believe that they collect that data specifically.
And I do want to say that I appreciate the public education on evictions, and I want the general public to know, as Councilmember Caballero mentioned, that legal aid cannot represent undocumented folks, but they do offer a substantial training to nonprofit organizations that face people who are undocumented, and it is very helpful to have that information at your fingertips. And so if you have not had the training, I want to encourage you to reach out to them and get the training so that your staff is well aware of the tenants' I won't say rights, but they have advocates, and they have ways to respond to questions that are asked of them. So I just want to make sure that is clearly stated. And I am adding, I'm just noting in my list, and my list keeps growing for this Tenants' Bill of Rights, I will say, the erasing the rental eviction judgments, figuring out something for the DSS arrears systems, because we know that delay is going to live there. And then, I'm just making sure, yeah, those are the 3 that I added. And the lockers in the showers with the parking lot is something I am specifically focus on. I feel like maybe I should be pulling you all in. I think I shared with council that there's a campus study right now for urban ministries and my church, St. Philip's, trying to figure out what it looks like. And I feel like this should be a part of that conversation because the way that things are in this state, this one program is one that I will say that the program's goals don't actually address all the things that should be looked at. And even though you're not meeting those goals, it is very clear to me that without this type of program in place, there are so many more gaps. And this is a like semi-plug in a way that it's so hard to even like think about what it would look like without you there, because that over 800 people without an advocate in that courtroom have no way to know exactly what it is they should do and shouldn't do. And I want to say that the 1,200 others that they speak to about what you told them, I mean, it just kind of, it's the gift that keeps on giving because you're sharing information.
Absolutely. That raises a good point. Because of our presence now, just like any program, it takes a little while to build up the word in the community. And so now what we're seeing more often actually is almost all of our clients are coming from the courthouse clinic as opposed to through the general legal aid helpline. And another portion of that are clients who we represented maybe last year. And then they had us helping them at that point, and they still have my number in their cell phone. And so then when they get a notice to vacate, they call me. And so I anticipate that as we continue to build that constant presence and that we've had this program, the amount of people that we will continue to serve will increase. We have a Facebook page where we will do some live videos on that. Legal Aid will do live self-help, how to represent yourself, what you need to know in eviction. We just published an eviction guide that gives individuals resources, and that's even if we're not able to represent somebody, those are resources that we're able to give to everybody.
And there was one last thing I was thinking. As soon as you said the guide, I lost it. But there's a piece of. I'll come back.
I'm going to acknowledge our mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councilmember Javier.
Just very briefly, thank you so much being a Central grad, law school grad. No, look, that's a book too strong, it's that one. I just have a quick question, and I think Councilwoman Freeman, I know if you're in the courthouse every day, you know the players. Are there particular landlords that you see more often than not? Are there repeaters? If you don't feel comfortable saying their names, but if you could give us an idea whether it's, a lot of people will take up a lot of space on a docket. I used to supervise those magistrates and used to have some of those dockets in district court once it was appealed to that. And I will agree that the law in that area, in my opinion, is very skewed towards not helping poor people maintain housing. So I saw that firsthand, but you always had some frequent flyers that you could count on. Are you still experiencing that?
Yes. There are some landlords who, in my opinion, use the summary ejectment process as a debt collection tool. And so they are more likely to consider that if they file and somebody's now facing eviction, that will be the impetus that person needs in order to come up with the money to pay the rent to avoid the eviction. And then what happens in those particular cases is that because of the timing of the court, although that particular landlord, by the time you get to court, they could demand not just the rent that they missed, but then whatever month, like let's say we're at courts today, and you miss January rent, the landlord could demand February rent as part of to dismiss the case. But then sometimes they don't. And so then they'll dismiss the case, but now the tenant, because they sold everything they had, they, borrowed every bit that they could, now they can't pay February rent. And so then now they get another filing for February, and they are in a cycle. And that cycle, once you get behind and the landlord that you are leasing with, they have a right to do that. But at the same rate, it's one of the ways that some tenants get trapped in a cycle because they're using everything that they can get in order to get out. And so we do see certain landlords who do use that more regularly, and sometimes those are also the ones in their defense as housing providers that are actually more willing to work with us or work with a tenant in terms of coming up with that rental assistance. But at that point, sometimes the number of filings against that tenant, it essentially means that that tenant's going to really struggle to find housing anywhere else at that point. So we do have that as, we see that a lot. And then we also have not any specific landlord in general, but the more, common apartment complexes that are held by, LLCs. So you can't identify what the name of the apartment complex is by the name. We see a lot of breach of lease cases from them. So those are the cases where they might be 1 month, and then there's no defense for a tenant at that point, like, saying, my mother died last week is not a defense for why you couldn't pay the rent. And then in a lot of those cases, the landlord does not have to accept the rent, or they won't accept partial payments. And so those, I think, are the two, the ones that might be smaller landlords, but use that as a way to collect the rent. And then the other ones that are just larger corporations that don't, they go by their lease more so than, in some cases, the relationships with folks on the ground.
I'm going to acknowledge Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Javier. I'm also going to ask my colleagues to just let you know that we're coming on 5 o'clock and we have to also be in closed session.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. I want to totally affirm what you said about other cities asking about how Durham is doing this. It's one thing to, do water and sewer and fix potholes and pick up garbage, but it's a different kind of swag to be able to talk about spending municipal money on eviction diversion, having an immigrant defense fund, all the things that we have going on in Durham. There aren't many moments you get to kind of brush your shoulders off in this kind of work, but this kind of work is one of those on Durham. So I want to thank you for that. As long as I'm a council member and have a vote, I will always, in perpetuity, support funding eviction diversion, to answer your earlier query. Secondly, I do want to say also to speak, and this is it, speak to your point about the eviction filings. I don't know if you heard our discussion about passing our legislative agenda, but one of the things we've asked our delegation to spend the precious political capital that they do have in Raleigh on is leaning in and drafting legislation to allow those filings. I had no idea that actually, notwithstanding the disposition of the case, that the filing was still there and how burdensome that can be to folks. So just to, I don't know if you heard, but we are asking our delegation, among other things, to lean in on that and pursue legislative relief when it comes to eviction filing. So
Thank you. Yeah.
we'll hopefully we'll see. But
Yeah, I've heard that there's some good movement in that regard, and it's such a, it's one of those things that benefits the tenant. 10 years down the road, the landlord, there's no reason why the landlord needs to keep that on the record or anything. So it's one of those things that has a really strong and direct impact on a tenant that doesn't really affect anyone else.
I'm asking our colleagues at the North Carolina League to municipalities to lean in on that as well in their legislative exploits. So thank you so much. Thank you, Councilmember. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Javier.
I'm good.
Okay, Councilmember Johnson, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thank you, Councilmember Hyman. I just wanted to thank you for coming today and your colleagues for being here and for doing this program, and recognize just the incredible growth that it's had over the last few years. And I hope that we can continue as a city to support the program and continue to expand it. COVID, despite, well, who knows if COVID will ever be over, but I think it highlighted a lot of the inequalities and challenges that people face in the system by, making them worse for a while, but it's still pretty intense out there for people trying to find affordable housing, and there's no signs of the economic situation that we're faced with getting any better for low-income people. So we need to continue to invest and support these kinds of programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And my contact information, I believe, was at the end, so if anybody wants to reach out, email's best, then feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that rich